"Uncle, please stop. It's paining me. It's hurting me." Amaka was still very young when her mother took her away to live in the city with her uncle, Mr. Johnson. That night, before traveling to the city to meet Uncle Johnson, Amaka's mother told her to be obedient to her uncle. "Make sure you listen to your uncle," her mother said. "He is a good man. Don't be a disrespectful child. Remember everything I told you and do whatever your uncle tells you to do," Amaka's mother said, then began to arrange Amaka's luggage for the journey to Uncle Johnson. Very early the next morning, Uncle Johnson drove into the compound. Amaka was already prepared and waiting for her uncle to come and take her to the city. Amaka happily took all her bags into the car and sat down happily while the car engine started. Amaka's mother looked a little sad. The city was far from the town, which was going to make it impossible for her to see her daughter anytime soon. "Amaka, the city is a place of modern life. Be wise and don't forget everything I said to you," Amaka's mother said, while waving at the car as it moved out of the compound. Uncle Johnson drove faster to the city. The journey to the city was like a journey to heaven. Amaka enjoyed watching all the different things that they passed through, things she never had the opportunity to experience in her town. As they drove through the city, Amaka saw tall buildings, busy streets, and people from all walks of life. She was amazed by the sights and sounds of the city. Uncle Johnson noticed her amazement and smiled. "You will get used to the city life soon," he said. "It's a place of opportunities and challenges." Amaka nodded, taking in every word. They finally arrived at Uncle Johnson's house in the city. Amaka was so shocked to see the big mansion her uncle was living in. After taking her luggage inside, Amaka was given some snacks to eat while she sat down on the couch to watch the television. Her uncle, Mr. Johnson, was a young man who was a successful businessman. He was rich and had a lot of luxurious properties. Uncle Johnson had a wife and 2 children who lived with him in the city of Lagos, but Uncle Johnson's wife was a traveler. She was always traveling from one state to another and never had the chance to stay with her husband in the city. Sometimes she would come to visit twice in a month. As Amaka settled into her new life, she began to notice that her uncle's behavior towards her was changing. He would often find excuses to touch her or make her feel uncomfortable. At first, Amaka thought maybe her uncle was just being overly affectionate, but as the incidents continued, Amaka realized that something was terribly wrong. She felt trapped and scared, and she didn't know who to turn to. One day, while Amaka was staying with her uncle, she was inside the living room with Uncle Johnson's children when she heard her name from a distant room. It was her uncle who screamed her name, so she quickly stood up and went to meet him. Uncle Johnson was inside his bedroom. It was Saturday, so Mr. Johnson stayed at home because it was a day off. He was inside his room watching a video on a small mini television placed at the right side of his bedroom. The video was an adult video which was improper for a young girl like Amaka. Amaka rushed into the room and saw her uncle sitting on his bed watching the television. Uncle Johnson noticed that Amaka was wearing a very attractive dress. He stared at her for some seconds and said, "Amaka, I want you to go and get me a glass of water." "Okay, uncle, I will get you the water immediately," Amaka said, and went away to get the water for Uncle Johnson. After leaving the room, Uncle Johnson began to have bad thoughts about his niece. He got influenced by the movie he was watching, so he wanted to do exactly what he saw in the movie to his niece. Uncle Johnson never had the opportunity to be with his wife because she was always traveling from one place to another. This was because of the business his wife was into. She had to travel to meet up with her customers. Amaka came back to her uncle, holding a glass of water. She gave Uncle Johnson the glass of water, and Uncle Johnson collected the water and dropped it on the small table closer to his bed. Then he stood up and went to lock the door. As a young girl, Amaka was confused and did not understand why her uncle was locking her up inside his room. He looked at her face anxiously and asked, "Amaka, I want you to give me something." "Uncle, I don't have anything to give you. I'm just a young girl." What can a young girl like me give to my uncle? Amaka said to her uncle. Yes, you have something to give to me, something my wife hardly does for me, Uncle Johnson said while staring at her body. Amaka was confused and wanted to know what her uncle was talking about. She thought for a while but couldn't figure out what her uncle was talking about. Uncle Johnson proceeded by putting his hands on Amaka's shoulder. He rubbed her softly at her shoulder and tried to bring his hand to where he was not supposed to touch. But Amaka quickly removed his hands from her body. Uncle, my mummy told me never to allow anyone to touch me there, Amaka said to her uncle while she stood watching her uncle, her face covered with fear. Her uncle was already into her. He wanted to take advantage of the opportunity. Amaka, remember, your mother told you to do whatever I say. That is because she knows I will not hurt you. Just let me touch it now, Uncle Johnson said with a soft voice. Amaka thought for a while and remembered that her mother warned her never to disrespect Uncle Johnson. Do whatever your uncle tells you to do, her mother's voice flashed in her memory. Then she allowed her uncle to touch her exactly where he wanted. As a young girl, she'd never experienced what she was facing, so she did not properly understand what her uncle was doing. But Uncle Johnson proceeded even further. At this point, she couldn't bear it anymore and told her uncle to stop, but Uncle Johnson was greedy and wanted to take things to another level. She tried removing herself from the situation, but she couldn't. She cried and cried, but nobody was there to come for her. Meanwhile, Uncle Johnson's children were in the living room watching movies. They had been waiting for Amaka to come back so they could continue playing and watching the movie together. They never knew that Amaka was undergoing something unforgivable from their father. Soon, they began to hear her voice, a voice that sounded like she was in trouble. One of Mr. Johnson's children decided to go and check what was happening. As the child walked toward Amaka's voice, they realized that the cry was coming straight from their father's bedroom. The little boy was wondering what could be happening inside the room, so he went further and held the door. He tried to open the door, but it was locked. Uncle Johnson quickly noticed that someone was standing at the door. When he heard the voice, he realized it was his son, David. Uncle Johnson opened the door and pretended like nothing was happening. David walked inside anxiously. "Father, what is wrong with our friend? I heard her crying," the little boy asked. "Don't worry, David. Your friend had an accident while she was bringing me a glass of water. She fell and broke her arm, so I was giving her a soft massage on the affected part of her arm," Johnson said to his son. Amaka knew her uncle was lying. She couldn't speak out because her uncle told her to remain silent. She was sad and angry. That day was going to be the unforgettable day of her life. That night, Mr. Johnson realized that Amaka was still sad, so he went to her and told her to clean her tears. "I have done nothing wrong to you. You're almost a woman now. Don't worry, you will soon be used to it as time goes on," Uncle Johnson said. Amaka was confused and didn't know what to say. "Uncle, I don't want you to do that to me again. It pains," Amaka said. Amaka's uncle smiled and said, "Amaka, I'm not hurting you. It's just a play between me and you." "Don't worry, next time we will play a different type of game," Uncle Johnson convinced. Then he brought out plenty of snacks and milk. He gave it to her as a gift from him. Amaka accepted the plenty of gifts, which made her smile a bit. "Amaka, your mother will be coming to the city to visit us tomorrow. Make sure you don't tell her anything, or you will hate your uncle stopping buying you plenty of snacks," said Mr. Johnson. "No, Uncle. I want you to buy me plenty more snacks," Amaka said to Uncle Johnson. Amaka was confused and didn't know what to do. She didn't want to disobey her uncle, but she also didn't want him to continue doing what he was doing. The next day, Amaka's mother visited and Amaka wanted to confide in her. But when they sat down to talk, Amaka couldn't find the courage to speak up. Mr. Johnson, ever the manipulator, smiled and assured her mother that he was taking good care of Amaka. He even promised to enroll her in a new school, which made her mother happy. After her mother left, Amaka's uncle's disturbing behavior resumed. One night, he tried to convince Amaka to play another game, offering more snacks as a bribe. Amaka hesitated but gave in once again, feeling unable to resist. Just as things were about to take a darker turn, Amaka heard a knock at the door. It was her uncle's wife who had returned from a trip. "Darling, it's me. Open the door," she called out. To her surprise, she couldn't believe what her eyes saw. Overcome with shock and anger, she immediately called the police. Uncle Johnson was arrested and sentenced to prison. Amaka, though shaken, finally felt safe. Her mother took her back home, holding her close as tears of relief streamed down her face. With time, love, and support, Amaka slowly began to heal, knowing she was finally free. Amaka's story is a powerful reminder that no child should suffer in silence. If something feels wrong, speak up, seek help, and never be afraid to tell someone you trust. Courage and truth can bring justice and healing. Every child deserves to feel safe, loved, and protected. Let's stand together against injustice and create a world where every voice is heard. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Share this message to inspire change.